All right, good morning, everyone. I see we got some folks coming in after the break. Well, welcome to the fifth and final session of FRC. So myself and the panel would just like to express our gratitude for the diehards that are here, sticking it out to the end. So thank you guys for being here. My name is Chad Northington. I'm a senior project manager with Terracon. And yes, you can get really injured in softball, if you were wondering, but you may have heard the other versions of the story about bullfighting and riding, and there was actually a bar fight and a couple other things, but it was softball, kind of boring. So anyways, we got a great panel here today with us, and we're going to save questions till the end, if you wouldn't mind, and so write those down as we're going along, and we'll circle back to them after we've gotten through all the presentations. And we're going to get started with Dr. Ziqi. I got it. Yep. All right. So I always like to try to get the names right here. So Ziqi is no stranger to FRC, and he's a regular presenter. So he's going to be talking about potentially yet another emerging contaminant to add to the list if we don't have enough already. So without further ado, sir.
Thank you, Chad. Good morning. Hi, hello, ni hao. Today, I'm going to talk about something about fact, rules about lithium as the potentially new emerging contaminant. Oh, sorry. So what is lithium? It's an atomic element with a symbol as Li. In China, that is, can I go back? Oh. It's one of the top 2 populated last name, with a population more than US election turnout numbers. As we can see in the periodic table, among the 118 elements, lithium is the number 3, which is not a gas phase like hydrogen or helium we frequently use in our balloons. However, it's a solid phase and very reactive in air or water environment. Without proper storage, it can get fire, exploded. That's why it's used in hydrogen bomb as one of the procedures, and has many industrial and pharmaceutical applications, such as metal alloy in aircraft or rocket launch. The aluminum lithium alloy literally can reduce the aircraft by weight 20%, which means it saves the fuel efficiency by 20% more. All we are aware of lithium, I believe, is lithium-ion battery in our electronics. Over the last actually 4 or 5 years, the demanding is skyrocketing. This is not a new technology. Lithium battery was developed in 1970s. Actually, it just won Nobel Prize of Chemistry in 2019 due to the booming of lithium battery in EV marketing or business area. Currently, the world produce about slightly less than 250,000 metric tons per year, which is way less than the actual EV demanding. Right now, about 3 to 4 million metric tons per year. The limiting factor is not really technology or economic or natural reserve limitation. It's because of the legal issue, environmental evaluation, impact to the land surface, groundwater, surface water. Like in Serbia, this August, thousands of their citizens poured to the street, protest against a proposed mining in their country. In US, currently, there is only one active lithium mining in Nevada, producing a very tiny portion the global production so far. But pretty soon, it could become Silicon Valley of lithium, or I would call it Lithium Valley in Nevada. Over the last couple of years, to meet the green energy transition or to meet the sustainable energy storage, American kind of approved or permitted 2 mining facilities in Nevada. If you do some search, all the leading car manufacturers are investing multiple million, close to $1 billion for each car manufacturer for this mining process. Don't think this will meet the demanding. The construction won't kick off. A lot of legal action still in brewing. And the actual production could be anticipated within 3 to 5 years time frame. Lithium batteries are very valuable tool. However, when they reach their end of life, they will become waste. Right now, the small device battery are treated as universal waste. However, several larger fire and explosion accidents happened in Chicago, Houston, draw a lot of attention at the news. So EPA developed a temporary memo right now to regulate or suggest the lithium battery will be likely hazardous waste. It will develop a lot of guidelines for transport or management. From here, you can see the spent lithium battery has more lithium or metal than the natural mining. However, right now in North America, only less than 1% lithium batteries are recycled. Compared to, lead acid batteries, they are pretty much 100 or 99% recycled. There are a couple of reasons. First, the large EV batteries have not reached their end of life yet. So a lot of recycling facility or proposed, there are 40 facilities trying to do this business. So, they don't have enough really battery to economically sustain their operation. The other reason is every 2 years, even a single battery manufacturer, their recipe will change slightly. And different battery manufacturers have different formulas. So there will be not a single or generic recycle process for the lithium battery. I would point out some component here. We talk about PFAS a lot over the last 8 years. Please be aware PFAS compounds are still essential in lithium battery as binders, as electrolyte, which to extend the battery lifetime. So when the battery is recycled or buried in landfill, they will have the potential to cause surface water or land surface groundwater impact. Is lithium toxic? Way before lithium battery era, back to 1940, lithium was known to be effective control, our mode actions. If you guys were here yesterday during Nick's presentation, this chemical will not change his outfit, but could quiet him down a little bit. So as a double-edged sword, any chemicals, any pharmaceutical, any medicines could have adverse effect. So studies have shown, based on this patient symptom, there are all kind of side effects, like skin dryness, weight loss, particularly, affect your kidney function, your neurological system. Our blood needs like 3,000 milligram per liter sodium as balanced electrolyte. However, lithium is next to sodium. If it reaches like 10 milligram per liter in our blood, it can be fatal effect, cause fatal effect. So based on this side effect data, the US EPA developed a provisional toxicity value, which is 2 micrograms per kilogram per day. Please be aware, our frequently used 2005 627770, 140 ppb lithium in groundwater, which was based on a toxicity value 10 times higher than this new value, which means potentially our GCTL could be decreased by a factor of 10. So right now, EPA and the USGS are using a reference level or screening level for lithium in water at 10 ppb or 10 microgram per liter. Lithium also called, ecological effect. Right now, there's more in the study in process to understand really the mechanism. Some numeric criteria could be developed in the future. So is lithium really present in our drinking water? Yes. Naturally, the USGS, based on the 30 years data in groundwater, they use the AI model to predict over 100 million US could be drinking water with elevated lithium, like 37 to 45 in our private or public wells. We all know lithium is the only non-PFAS contaminant or chemicals monitored in UCMR 5 between 2023 and 2025. By July this year, the data in our public drinking water system indicating about 25 our drinking water with concentration above the 10 ppb levels. The maximum could be 2 orders magnitude higher. It will be interesting to analyze the full set data after year and a half more. Right now, maybe 60% of the system reported the data. Not all drinking water system reported yet. At that time, if we can find out really this pretty much the natural level, if we can identify our human activity contributions to the groundwater or drinking water source. Further, unlike nationwide, we have slightly less exceedance in our drinking water. About 26 public well systems detected with lithium above 10. Totally about 280 systems reported data by July 2024. You can see the exceeded systems are pretty much located along the coastal area. So one explanation could be just the saltwater intrusion or storm surge impact, because we know the ocean water has a couple of hundred ppb level of lithium. It's not feasible for mining or harvesting at this time, but they are above above the drinking water screening level. We heard of rain of PFAS or shower of PFAS in Miami area. Actually, those levels are in PPQ levels. So if we lower the detection limit enough, you will see all kinds of chemical everywhere. So I did not start all these 96 public utility or drinking water utility among the 280 in Florida. So here are some selected PFOS data, which are about 20 ppts. If we back to the 2016 US EPA final health advisory level 70 ppt, there will be only one drinking water system right now above the level. However, after setting the 4 ppt as the MCL, there are 35 our Florida drinking water, above the federal law level. Similarly, for lithium, if science further develop, the toxicity value of the Federal Science Advisory Board review found out lithium could have higher toxicity. That means the screening level, if lowered down to 1 ppt, that pretty much 100% our drinking water will have negative impact. So if you are curious about lithium in your drinking water, particularly if you are in a private well, don't worry, the detection limit, the measurement analytical method are there, have been there for many years, not like PFAS. We have to develop 1633 for non-drinking water matrix. So both this method could detect the lithium at the required or necessary level, and it's not costly, only like $20 per sample. Then can we remove it? It's an inorganic metal. No any way in the universe can destroy lithium. However, the treatment technology or process can remove lithium from our drinking water. A simple under-sink RO system can remove lithium and other, even PFAS, 1,4-D from our drinking water supply. I would like to highlight the comparison of lithium to other emerging chemicals. I listed this table, the UCMR 1 through 5 for some selected chemicals. EPA's purpose is to understand this new emergent chemical, whether or not they are posing risk to our drinking water. Then decide whether or not, next step will be needed. Many of these, we were panicking at that moment, then after a year, settled down, although we still, monitoring if we know the site has the specific source. one of the chemical, 1,4-dioxane, which is the one almost making to drinking water regulation before PFOA and the PFAS. However, due to the uncertainty in their toxicity study, another factor is treatment cost. Other than AOP, there's not really much technology can treat the large quantity or flow rate of drinking water. Reverse osmosis can, but you need discharge 20–30% concentrate. AOP, we all are aware, whole bunch of byproducts will be present. Orlando folks, if you check your drinking water source, we have bromate frequently above the regulated level or health advisory level. So compared to 1,4-dioxane or 2016 PFOA PFAS, clearly lithium could be the next one under spotlight or draw more attention. More comparison details here between lithium and PFAS. I bet the reason primarily was PFAS was a man-made chemical. Another reason I think is more bioaccumulative than lithium in our human body. But toxicity is toxicity. So will lithium become the next CEC in the spotlight? It's meeting all these RTRC, emerging chemical, high priority criteria. What will happen? Should we vote right or vote left, share the spotlight? It really depends on the next step, whether or not EPA want to evaluate more about lithium risk, exposure, data gap, particularly toxicity studies. From there, it can be major or can be nothing, like many, MTBE or perchlorinate. So who should be concerned at this moment? We know it's naturally occurring at a level above the health screening level pretty much across the US. The Midwest, the Southwest, people are drinking, 20–30 ppb levels lithium. However, all these industries or processes, they could release or discharge lithium impacted water at several hundred ppb, ppm, not ppb. Just like a oil gas industry. They extract the oil from underground, separate, recover oil, and then re-inject the brown water back to the deep zone. But not at always. In South Florida, Southwest Florida, there are several, oil operation field back to 1940. There, the brine water literally discharged to land surface. Right now, it's just monitoring sodium chloride and TDS, but lithium could be the next one. This area called Smackover, I don't know what it is, probably you guys do. It's a large oil reserve band from Texas all the way to Panhandle, Florida. The oil fraction pretty much done with their business. Right now, it's the primary bromine production or extraction in the world, dominating like 30–40% bromine production. So they are still pumping this brine water from 1,000 feet underneath to the surface, get bromine out, then redispose, redischarge. I don't know the detail how they manage all this brine waste. However, recent study indicating those water contains 300 to 500 ppm lithium. That's a very valuable natural resource. ExxonMobil, has already acquired over 100,000 acres in Arkansas, as a potential to harvest or mine the lithium in this area. I guess this is my talk. I will be happy to take any questions. If you, have any questions in the future, just feel free to reach out to me. I will be more than happy to share lithium knowledge or information I have compiled.
Thank you. So, like I said, we'll go ahead and save the questions till the end, so we'll have time here. So we're just going to keep moving. Our next dynamic duo here, Mr. Joe Ullo, don't deny it. And we have Manny Nagaiah. Got it. Okay. And they're going to share on landfill redevelopment. So Manny, here you go. That's where you're. Okay.
Hi everyone, good morning. Thank you for being here. Today I'm going to be talking about a confidential C&D, construction and demolition debris landfill redevelopment project out of Miami-Dade. This presentation will be part technical, part regulatory, no chemistry. Hopefully that's going to save you some grief here. Just kidding. So today Joe and I will be talking about it, and let's get going. Here's a quick roadmap for today. I'm going to get us started with a quick site overview, talk about pre-development conditions and up until where things are today. I'm going to spend a lot of time, or some time, call it, on the site assessment, remediation, and related topics. I'm going to start and get going on the regulatory framework for this project, and I'm going to leave it in the safe hands of Joe to bring us home for this presentation. Here's a quick visual. So this is an approximately 25-acre site on what used to be the edge of Miami-Dade back in the day. It was mostly wetland, some ag, I would say up until the mid-'80s, early '90s. And obviously, as cities expand, more infrastructure happens, this swath of land opened up, and someone did permit this into a C&D landfill, or in 1995 onwards is what the records say anyways. So in 1999, the guy did, or the previous owner did start C&D landfilling on this property. So what is C&D, I guess? What C&D is non-water soluble, it's non-hazardous, it's not class 1, class 2, it's not asbestos. Everything else, or at least how FDEP defines it, is C&D. So if you can imagine things coming out of land development projects, if you can imagine things coming out of new construction, everything falls under this broad bucket. So it can range from anything as simple as vegetative matter. It can be a lot of things as I've listed here, but that's the thing to drive home here. For a quick perspective on landfills, there are about 3,000 active landfills in the US, 10,000 closed landfills. And the last time I did the research in Florida, I do believe there's about 500 closed landfills in the state of Florida. To fast forward the project here a little bit, so the landfilling did occur from 1999 to 2004. And the way landfills are closed is to place a 2-foot clean fill cap. That's typical across the country, same in Florida. So what is a clean fill cap? You're really looking for an 18-inch layer of structural fill or like clean sand from a quarry. You're trying to add some topsoil, sodding and all that, and that's to minimize erosion, minimize gullies, and also promote drainage. So what does this clean fill cap do? In theory, it's supposed to limit leachate. And one thing I forgot to mention in my previous slide, C&D landfills are not lined, because by definition, the operator has to bury debris that's non-water soluble, so there's really, at least in theory, there's no need for a liner in a C&D landfill. And by theory, no leachate gets generated in a C&D landfill. So the site did complete landfilling in 2004, but the clean fill cap was not officially certified till 2017. So there was a big, I guess, a 13-year gap, which we'll talk about later on. But that administrative gap essentially meant that long-term care, which is typically 5 years for a C&D landfill, 30 years for a class 1, for reference, was initiated only in 2017. So the new owner came in around 2019, 2020, call it, applied for a zoning change for 2 things: to convert the site used to be industrial commercial, and also increase the height of the landfill. In the sense, landfills are limited by height, whatnot, so the clearance was also improved. From that point onwards, we did go through the way I always see a redevelopment project, through pre-due diligence, entitlements, design phase, construction, and post-construction, and let's pass through each one of it slowly. The project itself was a 350 to 400,000 square feet cold storage warehouse, typical site improvements, the whole 9 yards. So let's look at the conceptual site model for the project. The conceptual site model is really your sandbox and you're operating in. The more you zoom in and out of your site, you're able to understand a lot more. So what is a CSM? You can write 10 pages about the site itself. The way I see it usually is, what is the source, what is the media it's affecting, what is the exposure pathway, and who are the receptors. So that's the way we looked at this site too. When you zoom out of the site, you'll find out that this site is in an area of regional landfilling, some permitted, some unpermitted. So what are the impacted media? The impacted media are primarily soils, groundwater, and soil vapor, primarily restricted to methane. Excuse me. The pathways, so to speak, is really the health hazard to the future employees that are going to work in this warehouse. So what did we do with all the impacted media? So essentially, we've spent 2 days talking about cleanup, to call it like NFA or MCLs, whatnot. In this case, this is a redevelopment project. It always almost boils down to dollars and cents. So we tried to risk away what we could, and we tried to make or do remediation where we needed to, is really the way I would say it. So in essence, in the soil, all the way up to the Vado zone, water table, whatnot, we did find the usual culprits, call it. We did see arsenic, TRPH, and PAHs. So we did not do any disposal, or we did not want to do any disposal. So the way these redevelopment projects work, you're trying to keep it on site, cap it on site, and save dollars. So in this case, we over-excavated the future stormwater management area and essentially tried to cap it on site. Here I want to spend a minute or so talking about deep dynamic compaction. We already have established this site as a landfill. And because it's a landfill, obviously the waste could be packed loosely or properly. In this case, we had to use DDC, which is deep dynamic compaction, which is essentially 10 to 40 foot cranes, and you essentially tamp it down to make sure the waste settles, you're improving the soil density and texture so that you're able to establish a good subgrade to build on. The old way of doing this is preloading, where you place soil for like months together. It's time consuming, whatnot. DDC is you can call it the state of the art, whatnot. So that's how soils were dealt with. For groundwater, again, zooming out of this site, and because of regional landfilling and other activities going on site. All we did is establish a baseline of our contamination. So what did we see in groundwater? Primarily, we saw iron, TDS, ammonia, and sulfate. Most of these would generally fall under a secondary standard, so it's not a primary MCL, so to speak. So we established the delineation, and we're going to be doing water quality monitoring for a long time. Obviously, this is a landfill, so we did see methane. So we did install a methane gas mitigation systems for this site. So there are two ways of doing a methane gas system. One would be to integrate the methane system along with earthwork, so where you install the barrier, a ventilation system, and like an exit system, call it. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to apply a proprietary application right beneath the building slab, but you still need a ventilation layer, and you still need an exit system. The stormwater at this site in Miami-Dade, you're not allowed to discharge into a contaminated plume. So we did have a line retention basin and also targeted exfiltration trenches where there was no contamination. So here's the regulatory framework for this site. In essence, I told you already that we were in year 4 of long-term care as we took on this project. So under FDEP's books, this project was not closed. But because we are doing redevelopment, we had to go through Chapter 6 to 780, and by extension, Chapter 24 in Miami-Dade. Although I have a lot of acronyms listed here, it basically boils down into 2 buckets, an FDEP bucket and a county bucket. APR is an alternative procedure request. That's really what you do when you're trying to disturb the cap. WOW is actually not in the guidance. It's my way of saying water over waste. OSHA applies because you're trying to redevelop a landfill. LTC is long-term care. And I'm going to pass it along to Joe to bring us home. So.
Thank you, Manny. So a project like this requires a good transition between the technical and the legal components and the regulatory components as well. And so working with Langan and working with Manny was a really great experience throughout the project, and working with Durham and working with DEPs also were great experiences. And as we look at this slide that we do the transition on, it's a good slide to do it because we were dealing with, we talk about the conceptual site model for the site, we had to look at it under, as Manny said, 2 buckets. We had to reopen the landfill that was a closed C&D, and then we had to go through and close it again. That would be under 62701, which is over there. And then we had to go through a closure because we had a release from the landfill that has resulted in groundwater contamination. So that led us into Miami-Dade Code Chapter 24 and the requirements of 62780. That should be 62701-530 also played a role, even though it was a C&D, but because we had methane emissions, we had to use that as a reference to determine how to manage that emission from coming from the landfill. A couple of the acronyms, WOW, water over waste. That became one of the ones that we were really talking about a lot because we ended up with situations where we had a high water table and we were encountering waste with the water, and we were having to do our storm drainage as well, and that led to the liner system in the stormwater facilities. Old dump guidance could be used as guidance. And one of the other interesting things is, as Manny mentioned, all around this facility, there are other facilities that are being constructed on top of some unpermitted landfill facilities. And the requirements for unpermitted versus permitted, they vary greatly because under a permitted context, you really are working to meet the permit requirements to actually reach closure, which leads to, at times, increased costs. And that could be challenging, and that's one of the things as practitioners, consultants, we should be talking to our clients and explaining to them the realities and the differences in the programs. So when you look at the regulatory framework, we talk about the pre-due diligence phase 1, phase 2 ESAs and the stormwater evaluations. So on this project, one of the things that we are encouraged to do is you might want to do some level of phase 1. You could do phase 1 pretty well and have a good idea that it used to be a landfill. How was it operated? Was it closed? Where is it in the process of long-term care? What is the regulatory record? That's all publicly available. But landfills that are closed are closed. People don't necessarily have an x-ray machine that could tell you exactly where everything is. You might want to go do test pits. You might want to go figure things out. Rule 62-701-610 has requirements for other closure requirements. And in that case, if you're going to go disturb that landfill, meet with the agency, talk to the agency, determine which way you're needing to go, so that way you can set up a plan for your phase 2 work. And that way you can get a real clear picture of what you're going to be encountering when you disturb that landfill. Another question in phase 2 is presence or absence of what's in the groundwater. Is the groundwater assessment that's being done in accordance with long-term care, is that enough to fit your needs? If you're in a really high congested area, what about off-site considerations? These are all things that you need to consider from a liability perspective. When we think about, in this case, we started out with the due diligence, went forward. Then we go through the assessment, design, and entitlement phase. In this process, the entitlement, you could actually start construction while you're working on your other aspects of the project, which is what happened here. And it's important to be able to do that because you need to be designing so you can understand what your closure is going to look like when you go through your process and you go through your permitting process. For Miami-Dade Durham, we had our soil and groundwater assessments that were responsive to Chapter 24, and that was crossing over into 62780. And we also had our soil vapor assessments. And then finally, we had to worry about stormwater discharge with this project. This does not match my notes, so I'm going to wing it. So we did have to disturb the clean fill cap, and that came down to an alternate procedures request for the cap disturbance. And when we say unusual, it's not all that unusual these days for a C&D to be converted. Where are C&Ds usually located? They're usually located in areas where you have industrial activity, because that's where it's most convenient to put the construction demolition debris. But as much as possible, if you can keep your processes separate. And when I say that, I'm talking about closing a C&D landfill, keep that under 62701, and then doing site rehabilitation, keep that under Miami-Dade Code and 62780. All the while you're keeping it separate, you need to really be in communication with your regulators so that way everyone understands what's happening, and then when you do your submittals. In this case, we had a phased approach. We did phase 1 was the assessment, and phase 2 was the construction, assessment and design. Phase 2 was the construction, relocation of waste. Phase 3 was also was the closure, and then phase 4 is now going into long-term care. So in the construction phase, one thing I'll say is we had to do material management reports. We did do the deep dynamic compaction, which involved additional groundwater monitoring. And then when we talk about the methane gas, we had methane gas with this facility. And then when you're putting an actual enclosed structure, in this case a refrigerated warehouse, on top of the landfill, you do need to be ready to monitor your methane gas for multiple considerations. And one of which is a big one, which is the explosivity concerns and the immediately dangerous to life and health. And with this system, with any system, I think you have to be ready to adjust. It's quicker to adjust and actually adjust, make your systems as adjustable as possible. In this case, it started out being a passive vent system, and it was immediately adjusted to an active system. It's quicker to adjust and go active rather than try to figure out exactly what the problem is. If you could just go active and put in additional work and additional fans, it worked out a lot better in this case. Also, throughout the process of the construction, you have to be aware of different guidance documents that may come out. In our case, we put it in our CAP system, and we had clean fill coming from a quarry system, and then DERM guidance came out with DERM guidance 7H. And when you look at that DERM guidance, one thing about that I learned from this process is a good thing to do is to go to DERM first and get soil classification letters of your fill materials, of where you're getting it from, what you're doing, and where you're using it. Get those soil classification letters up front. It could save you a lot of problems. And also, when you're placing the material, when you're doing your fill, take a lot of pictures. Take a lot of pictures of all of the information, of all the steps in the process. So that way, when questions are asked, you're not having to go back out there and redig, excavate, and do test pits or anything like that to show what happened. You actually have the photographs, and you have the on-site reviewer and person to certify the photographs that were taken. And one other thing is that you should definitely try to keep DERM and keep DEP informed throughout the process as you go through. When you're doing the construction phase, having to try and work with them on inspections and the like, especially at critical points, is a very good opportunity to be able to work with them so they can see exactly what's happening. As you go through a project like this, there are critical times, and it's better to have them come and see what happens, and that helps. Not only do you have the pictures, but you also had someone on site to be able to work with you and see things. Where are we going from here? So ongoing efforts. So we are now moving, very, very thankful. I talked to Mr. Johnny Vega this morning, and he's reviewing the file to figure out the actual closure date for this facility, which we're really excited about because that closure date will move us directly into long-term care. And so we are working right now on the Phase 4 long-term care permit. We call it Phase 4 because that's what we've always called it in terms of our phases. We are going to be continuing. We've got two separate segments here. So Phase 4 long-term care permit, and then the long-term care approval, and then groundwater monitoring for Phase 4 long-term care permit in the stormwater system. That's going to be kind of what I would call the 62701 closure idea and closure bucket. For the monitoring only plan and trying to determine stabilization and shrinking, and the MGMS operation and maintenance and the no further action proposal under section 2444, that will be our site rehabilitation efforts. So we've got two different buckets of efforts. We've got to still continue with the 62701 landfill closure requirements, and we also have to continue with, under the Miami-Dade scenario, the risk-based corrective action requirements, and seek a risk-based corrective action permit for the facility at the end of this process. So our ultimate endpoints, there are two of them. So we would like to get our Phase 4 permit for 5 years under 62701, 730. And then we're also looking to ultimately reach and achieve a position where we could have a risk-based corrective action permit under under Chapter 2444, Miami-Dade Code. And that permit, there have been other permits issued for other facilities, and with us being a C&D, we're kind of in a little of an uncharted territory because we're using a little bit of the information that we're receiving from 62701, 730, which is for methane gas and landfill closures. But that is not typically required for a C&D. That is required in our case because of the situation where we have an active building and we've done reconstruction on top of the facility. So we're working on we've been separating these into two buckets, so that way our Rebecca permit covers the long-term methane gas monitoring systems and O&M, and then engineering control inspections and the institutional controls as well. And that would be similar to what some other Rebecca permits have been issued in Miami-Dade County for the unpermitted dumps. And that would be a 10-year permit. And the Phase 4 will be for a C&D landfill, will be a 5-year permit, which would require groundwater monitoring. As we look at it, you typically would like to see that your groundwater monitoring for a 5-year period is clean, no concerns, no nothing. But as we know, that's almost a utopian environment, and that doesn't often happen. In our case, we do have groundwater impacts, and we do have groundwater impacts in the area. So we're going to be looking at two different areas. We're going to be looking at the phase long-term care permit monitoring network, and then a greater network for site rehabilitation monitoring. So the timeline of what's left. One thing I want to say about the timeline is it's important for clients who are maybe potentially redevelopers. Some are very sophisticated, they understand what a timeline means and what it means to have an environmental remediation site, landfill closure, and site rehabilitation. For some people, if you say those words and their eyes glaze over, stop, talk to them about the timeline, because the timeline is really important. From 2025 to 2030, what we're hoping is we're doing long-term care, we're doing the declaration to the public, which we're having to work with a new owner on this project. We're doing yearly updates for the financial assurance for inflation, and we're having to maintain financial assurance for the facility, the engineering control inspections, and the groundwater monitoring of the shallow aquifer compliance wells. So you want your client to understand that after you do all of this work, this is what you're still going to have to do. And then when I say TBD to perpetuity, that's going to be your risk-based corrective action and your institutional engineering controls and your methane gas mitigation system, your O&M. That needs to go on for infinity, because you will need to maintain this facility to have it be operational and have it be safe. And so that's all going to be part of the Rebecca permit implementation that's going to go on at 10-year increments, and it's going to be subject to reviews and inspections by Miami-Dade. So when we talk about the lessons learned, what I see about competing regulatory environments, I'd like to just call it complementary regulatory environments, because DERM is working on their work to try to respond and address issues that they're seeing in Miami-Dade County. And a lot of times they're trying to work, and some of the guidance that comes out is to help the practitioners to work through what's happening, how they're doing work in Miami-Dade. So having good communications with both DERM and DEP, when you're working on the alternative procedures request, when you're working on that goes to DEP. Understanding who is in charge of what, who's the ultimate reviewer on these things is very important. Understand the relationships of Department of Environmental Protection and Johnny Vega and Solid Waste, and also and just DERM and DERM overall in terms of site rehabilitation in Chapter 24. These are all important to understand and to have a good understanding of, but to also to just talk to the regulators. In this process, in this project, we had multiple regulatory path meetings. We thank DERM, we thank DEP for those meetings, and it was very good to be able to get us to the point where we understood which way we needed to go. The entitlements timeline, when you're getting into a project, that could be 18 to 24 months. That's great. You get your entitlements, you could start your work, start your project. But as we talked about, the other timelines are much longer. So when you talk about closure, we started working on this project. I think we got the alternate procedures request sometime in 2021. We're now reaching closure here at the end of 2024. So you're talking about 4 to 5 years from the time you get alternate procedures to the time you're possibly closed. Could that have gone quicker? Possibly. But the reality is these projects take a long time, and we have to be prepared for it. What you hope to be able to do is work on parallel tracks with your construction and keep everybody informed, so that way you have a building that's operating and have everything in your project not being slowed down by the environmental that needs to occur. DERM guidance, stay aware of updates that happen throughout a project. If you're at varying points in the project and something comes out that's going to affect your next phase, review that guidance document and understand what's going to happen and how it can affect you. Those guidance documents are trying to help you, so try to look at them and understand them. In our case, it resulted in verification of the engineering control, which we worked on. We worked through the process, took the samples, and split them with DERM, and we're fortunate that everything was just as we expected it would be, and it was clean. But realize that these guidance documents, they do often as well, there is a varying level of discretion for the agency whether or not you're dealing in a rule environment or a guidance environment, because that's when you're starting to get into, well, what is it? And also there's various levels of assurances for the regulated party in both environments. Understanding that and working through that is really important as you go through these type of projects, because some of these real steps could be very critical if you miss them. In a case where, in our case, if the EC verification did not come back positive, it could have resulted in a big problem for an already existing facility. So finally, in any type of project like this, prepare your client. There could be administrative proceedings that come from this project. We had to do an alternate procedures request, which involves noticing. You could be dealing with many issues at the agency level that you're realizing we really need to take this up to somewhere else? Is there EQCB considerations? What do we need to do? Realizing that in large projects that are millions of dollars, large complicated projects, you may be dealing with administrative proceedings. Talk about that up front, so that way it's not brought up at the end to say, oh, we're being challenged. Our alternate procedures request is now being challenged by the neighbor. Make sure that someone's aware that all these things could happen before they happen. You'll be a lot better shape with your client if you were able to do that. So here's our final slide. We can take from the time in December 2002, you can see it was a vacant C&D, it was just a landfill, C&D landfill. In March 2013, it was closed, quiet, and vacant. That's what our client sees when he comes out to look at it and decide to buy the site. It looks very, very nice because all you can see is a nice picture on the surface. It's when you open up the box that you find out that Forrest Gump was right. So finally, in 2023, you can see the cold storage warehouse. That's January of 2023. We are in November 2024. So the building has already been up. We've still been working on this for another year plus. And that's the way it goes. And think about methane gas mitigation systems. Really, you need to have the building there so you can figure out what's going on. You need to have the entire site completed so you can see what's going on. And in this case, your building is the landfill cap. So, and that's not the way our rules are written for the building to be the landfill cap. I've talked to DEP many times, wanted to try to figure out if there's a way where we could start incorporating some of these things into the rule for redevelopment. And that's something that I think we should all think about because that would really be helpful to people that are actually trying to do certain things with these projects. That's our speaker contacts. And as Chad said, we are saving questions till the end. But thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, guys. We're continuing our dialogue with Mr. Corey Scales is going to, with SiREM, share about our good friend dihalococoides, or DHC.
Good morning, everybody. This is my first time attending the Florida Remediation Conference. It's also my first time presenting here. So I just want to thank you all for coming out this morning. Sorry, losing my voice a little bit. I want to thank you all for coming out this morning and seeing all of our sessions here. Really appreciate it. I manage our culture production at SiREM, and I'm excited to share with you on how we can optimize bioremediation optimize bioremediation with low pH tolerant dihalococoides. So I'm going to start by talking about some inhibitors to chlorinated ethene dechlorination and how low pH can affect dihalococoides. We'll talk about some case studies, and then we'll finish up with some key takeaways. If you attended Dan Lay's presentation in the previous section, he kind of went into the degradation pathways here. But the center pathway here shown in green is the biotic degradation pathway for chlorinated ethenes to ethene. It's important to note that 1,1-TCA is inhibitory to the reductive dechlorination of CDCE as well as vinyl chloride, such that you need to degrade CDCE and vinyl chloride you need to degrade 1,1-TCA to 1,1-DCA before you'll get degradation of CDCE as well as vinyl chloride. As well, CDCE and vinyl chloride are inhibitory to the degradation of 1,1-DCA, such that you need to get CDCE and vinyl chloride degradation before you'll see 1,1-DCA degrade to chloroethane. Chloroform is also a potent inhibitor to chlorinated ethene reductive dechlorination, such that you need to get chloroform to degrade before you'll see essentially chlorinated ethenes degrade to ethene. As well, chlorofluorocarbon CFC-113 is also a potent inhibitor to chlorinated ethene reductive dechlorination. And all of these inhibitory compounds are trihalogenated compounds. And trihalogenated compounds inhibit dihalococoides by binding to the reductive dehalogenases. And we can overcome inhibition caused by these compounds by using KB1+. So KB1 Plus are grown to enrich the populations of Dihalobacter and Dihalogenemonas, and these bacteria have been cited in many different papers on their ability to degrade these inhibitory compounds. And with that, I want everyone to keep in mind that you don't want to get caught off guard by low pH. I am from Canada, I am a Canadian, so this one kind of hits home. I can actually hear my dad yelling to me, keep your head up. So yeah, don't get caught off guard by low pH. So pH from a biological perspective, a pH of 6 is 10 times more acidic than a pH of 7. A pH of 5.7 is 2 times more acidic than a pH of 6. And these may appear to be small changes in pH, but they can actually have significant impacts on a microbial cell membranes, their enzyme activity, DNA stability, as well as energy metabolism. So for Dihalococoides relies on the flow of protons into the cell for their energy metabolism and the flow of electrons out of the cell as their terminal electron acceptor for reductive dechlorination. So if the pH is low outside of the cell, it can actually disrupt this flow of protons and electrons, and you can get stalls and CDCE as well as phenyl chloride as we're affecting that energy metabolism. So the optimal dechlorination range for Dihalococoides is between 6.8 and 7.5, with complete dechlorination generally occurring between 6 and 8.5. And when you have a pH drop at your site below a pH of 6, you'll generally start to see increases in cis DCE as well as vinyl chloride due to this effect on energy metabolism. And drops in pH can be common, and that's because reductive dechlorination produces hydrochloric acid. And the fermentation of many electron donors produces acetic acid as well as CO2. CO2 can dissolve in water and you get carbonic acid. So if your site has a low buffering capacity, or a naturally low pH, you're going to see, you may potentially see stalls such that you have accumulations of CDC and phenyl chloride. We can overcome these low pH issues by adding buffers. The challenges kind of associated with this is you may have to inject large volumes of bicarb or buffering agents. Keeping the pH elevated over your remediation program can be difficult. And then we can also have distribution challenges where we get higher pHs around our injection wells, but then it's more acidic further out. But what really other options are there other than adding bicarb? And this is where SiREM has developed a low pH tolerant Dihalococoides. This particular culture was enriched from a wetland site with a pH less than 5. And we've been growing the culture on TCE, lowering the pH over the last 10 years. We started at a pH of about 6.5, and we're currently down to a pH of 5.5. And we're continuing to push this culture to go lower and lower. To date, we've applied this culture at more than 50 sites in 13 different states. I love this figure. So in 2022, we were growing the culture at about 5.6. This is complete reduction of chlorinated ethenes to ethene at a pH of 5.6. In 2023, we actually lowered the pH to 5.4, and we've been continually growing this culture in the lab at a pH of 5.4. And in the field, we feel confident that we can get complete reductive dechlorination down to a pH of 5.5. And like I said, we're continuing to lower this pH. I believe the plan for 2025 is to actually keep lowering it down potentially to a pH of 5.2. So this graph here, what we're looking at is the production of ethene. So complete reductive dechlorination producing ethene. So the lower red line there is a KB1 non-acclimated dihalococoides at a pH of 6, and the low pH KB1 plus shown in green produced ethene 5 times faster than non-acclimated DHC at a pH of 6. And we can see similarly that KB1 at a pH of 7, which is optimal for dihalococoides, we have similar ethene production rates compared to that of the low pH tolerant culture. Yeah. And a question I often get for this culture is, can low pH KB1 plus still degrade at a pH of 7? And the answer to that is yes. This is still a dihalococoides culture. Its optimal degradation is still at a pH of 7. The only difference is we've been acclimating this culture so it can handle that lower pH. So I want to move on here to talk about some case studies. This particular case study is in the southern United States. It had TCE discharge between 1963 and 1969, and the TCE discharge wasn't identified until 1992. The impact spanned 40 acres. It's located in industrial areas with adjacent residential areas. The highest TCE concentration was 759,000 micrograms per liter prior to remedial activities. There's been multiple remedial strategies employed over time. And the average pH across the site was 5.8. There's a lot of stuff going on here on this slide. The main thing that I want to get across is there were many injection points to get adequate distribution of the electron donor as well as the bioaugmentation culture. We did perform VFA testing, and what we're trying to see here was, did we get the adequate distribution of the electron donor for the dihalococoides to thrive in situ. So about 100 days after we do see the fermentation of the electron donor, and then 200 days out, we see that increase in the VFA concentration, just showing that we've established the conditions that are required for the dihalococoides. So what we're looking at here is the pH at the site over time, shown in blue, and in red we're looking at the dihalococoides population. There was a buffering agent that was added with the injections such that we saw an increase in the pH to approximately 7, but with the fermentation of the electron donor and reductive chlorination, we do see that pH drop over time. And we do see the largest production or growth of the dihalococoides when we do have that higher pH. But what's important here is that the population is maintained at above 1 times 10 to the 7 dihalococoides per liter, even with those lower pHs. Again, so we're looking at the concentrations of the CVOCs over time. At the top, you can see the pHs and how they progress across the sampling events for the site. And right away we see the degradation of TCE to cis when we have that pH of 7. And even as the pH is less than 6, we do see continual reductive chlorination of the chlorinated solvents. It's important to note that towards the end, we do see that increase in CDCE. Even low pH KB1 plus has a lower pH. Right now, it is a pH of 5.5. So because we do have that pH below 5.5, we're seeing that energy metabolism slow down, and we're seeing that increase in CDCE. If you were to use a non-acclimated dihalococoides at this particular site, it would be very likely that you would see that accumulation in cis as soon as the pH drops below a pH of 6. But because low pH KB1 plus was used, the buffering event at the site was pushed out rather than having to continually add bicarb to keep the pH elevated for complete reductive chlorination. And I hope I did okay on those slides, and I hope our client will allow us to present on this site again in the future. It's a really great site and seeing some really great results here. I want to talk about another case study in Alabama. This particular site had chlorinated ethenes as well as chlorinated ethanes. And the goal of this injection program was to reduce the max flux. They did do bench scale testing to ensure that this was the right approach. And they ended up installing a biobarrier along the site boundary. And I'll talk about that in a sec. So the biobarrier consisted of 9 well clusters, 17 wells total. Their goal here was to reduce the max flux below 250 micrograms per liter, treating a target thickness of 150 feet with a 20-foot ROI. They used the same amendments that were established in the treatability study. So they used an EVO, they used low pH KB1+, and for this particular application, they actually, to create their anaerobic water to protect the bioaugmentation culture in the injection process, they actually put their EVO in tanks and allowed it to ferment in the sun. And I just want to say that if you do have the time to do that, to allow those tanks to ferment, all the power to you. But just know that there are oxygen scavengers on the market, such as KB1 primer, where you can actually prepare your anaerobic water in under 2 hours. That way you're not spending time and money in the field. So this is just a cross-section of the target injection area. The target treatment area is shown by the dashed green line here. The blue and the orange are the injection wells. And then the red lines are the CVOC concentration contours. And this particular well here in the source area, OLG-G72, had multiple different ports across that 150-foot thickness. It was identified that there were some lifts that did have pHs that were less than 6. And to optimize remediation and not have to continually add buffer to keep the pH elevated, they utilized low pH KB1+. So this is looking at OLG or OLF-G72. It's all the different lifts across the source area there. And we can see that post-bioaugmentation, we do see degradation of all CVOCs to below the 250 microgram per liter threshold, the target design threshold, within the first year. And this is just a year later, looking at the CVOC concentration contours in that target treatment area. We do see that the concentrations have been significantly reduced in that area. And you'll notice here that there was a hotspot that was created down gradient from the injection activities. And this site has been continued to be monitored over the last 6 years. The CVOC concentrations in that treatment area continue to be reduced. They actually still have D. halicocoides present there with the pH of about 5.8, and the bugs are still continuing to degrade and maintain that reduced max flux. You'll notice that the hotspot has been reduced in this area. There are plans for reapplication in 2025 to decrease that hotspot in the down gradient location. In total, the CVOCs reduced 85% within the first year and continued to be down 6 years later. So the key takeaways that I hope I was able to get across here is reductive dechlorination produces acidic byproducts. Electron donors also can be ferment and produce acidic byproducts. So if your site has a naturally low pH or a low buffering capacity, you're more likely to see a drop in pH, and you may have stalls that lead to CDCE and vinyl chloride increases. We can overcome low pH conditions by adding buffering agents to increase the pH, and we can also optimize remediation using low pH acclimated dihalococoides. Yeah, awesome, thanks. Thank you, everybody.
All right, our final presentation for session 5 today will be with Mr. Jamie Davidson. He's going to be sharing an advanced oxidation process, proprietary, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Okay.
Yep. That's where your pointer. Advance, go back. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's my pleasure to be the last speaker of the conference, so I do appreciate you all taking the time to hang back and listen to me. As you can probably tell, I do have a strange accent. I'm based in Houston, Texas, but people tell me I'm from East Texas, so I just go with that. Originally from Scotland in the UK, and I have to apologize, I'm a mechanical engineer, so I am no chemist. My life revolves around duct tape and WD-40, so I will try my best to talk as technically as I can when it comes to the topic we're going to talk about today. So, looks like we've got a little font issue, but it's okay, we'll keep going. But what we're going to talk about today is Amerapex Corporation. For people that don't know who we are a company based in Houston, Texas, international company with multiple different divisions in various different sectors, industrial solutions, engineering, things like that. But our topic today is our environmental services group. We have some proprietary technology which is primarily advanced around advanced oxidation of contaminants in soils, specifically for hydrocarbons. And the case study I'm going to be talking about today has really been pioneered over the last 6 to 12 months on the advancements in our technology there, specifically for projects that we're undergoing right now in the Middle East for heavy hydrocarbons. We'll go through the details here in just a second, but just to kind of explain that this technology has been in and available in the US now for the best part of 15 years. We have been very poor at letting people know about our capabilities and what we can do, so hopefully this will be educational for a lot of people today. So this is our system right now that we're going to be talking about. It's our Total Environmental Solutions Technology. So T.E.S.T is the abbreviation. And T.E.S.T was specifically developed with a couple of primary advantages to what we saw in industry today. So the majority of the market that we support here domestically is in Texas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. And a lot of the remediation approaches there are typically dig and haul, bioremediation, landfilling, etc., which for our system is being primarily designed so we can do ex situ remediation. So what that means is it's not in situ, so we're not doing oxidation in the ground. We're actually excavating the contaminated area. We have the machine that actually goes to the job site and is parked right next to the contaminated zone. And we actually excavate the soil into the system. It processes through the oxidation. We're basically doing Fenton, for those who know that, and I can talk a little bit more about that in a couple of seconds. But essentially, we oxidize the soil for the hydrocarbons, organics there in situ, and then the soil goes back into the hole that you just dug after you do the relative sampling. So the whole premise of the design was to eliminate the requirement for transportation of contaminated soils off-site and obviously limit your liabilities when you're having to manage those contaminated soils. Just for people that don't know, roughly every cubic yard of contaminated soil is around about 1.4 tons. So as you can imagine, if you've got a significantly large impacted area, that's going to be a significant cost of moving that to a treatment site on a different location or to a disposal site. So let's just jump straight into the case study. I know there's a lot of words there, so I'll just talk through it. So for those who may or may not remember, back in the 90s, there was a significant conflict in the Gulf area in the Middle East. Essentially what happened is the retreating Iraqi forces set fire to all of the oil wells, approximately 700 of them, as they were getting pushed back out of the country. As a result of that, as you can see in the pictures here, there was significant environmental impact and damage, where approximately, if I recall correctly, there's about, it says 26 million cubic meters of impacted area right now. The latest estimates actually is still ongoing. They reckon there's about 40 million cubic meters of an impacted area. So literally the whole country has been impacted by the conflict. And what you also don't see, but you do see in the bottom right picture here, you do see the wet oil lakes that were generated as part of that war. What you don't know, or what you don't see, sorry, is that in addition to the conflict zones, over time since the 90s, because it hasn't been addressed, there's been significant groundwater contamination. So there's a heat map you can find online that will show you literally the zone of all of the groundwater in the country is pretty much contaminated as well. So our involvement in this was, there was a UN program set up for CARP, which is the Kuwaiti Environmental Rehabilitation Program. And what they're tasked with doing is they have some reparation funds from the war that have been put back into the country to be able to clean up these impacted areas so that they can start rehabilitating or revegetating the soil so that they can continue moving forward the prosperity of the country. Some important key factors, and I'm going to just take a quick drink. So some important key factors to take into account. And the parameters that we're dealing with here is primarily around TPH treatment, obviously. Also a soil mass balance requirement, and then there's a nutritional property requirement for the treatment of the soils in this project. If I go into the next slide here, this is going to give you a better example of the kind of things that we're dealing with in the country. So in the top left here, you have what they call their dry oil lakes. So this is where all the wet oil has been recovered, but you still obviously clearly see, if I can use the laser pointer here, a discolored zone here at various steps, which shows there's still significant levels of contamination in the soil. And then on the right-hand side here, these are what they're called as our wet oil lakes. These are still in significant areas in the country, so there's still a significant effort there in terms of contamination and cleanup. In this bottom picture here, what happened actually during the war, the army had to build temporary berms out of just piles of soil to contain the liquid fires that they were dealing with at the time. And as a result of that, these all became contaminated, and this is actually an excavated section, and this is a period of time later where you see the actual contaminant leaching through. So as you can gather, this is quite a significant effort to go through. Obviously, the contaminants in this part of the world are quite difficult. You're talking about up to C95 hydrocarbon chain with asphaltene and paraffin, in addition to TPH ranges up to and including 15% and above. So quite a nasty challenge here. So our company's involvement in this is we were contacted December of last year. There's several contractors, primary contractors that are in the country that are doing this effort. And they're doing a lot of bioremediation for 2 to 5% TPH ranges, but anything above that, they have not been successful and been able to find a solution to successfully remediate the soils. So we were contacted in December last year. We mobilized our advanced oxidation system over to the country. And quickly it became apparent that when we do advanced oxidation, typically up to C20, which we handle all the time here domestically in the United States, advanced oxidation is very efficient. But obviously, when you start getting above C20, you're dealing with the heavier hydrocarbon chains. It wasn't getting the full oxidation process to be able to treat those soils. So we had to do a little bit of R&D and actually come up with a secondary treatment system, which I'll explain here in just a second. But just to kind of go through an overview of the machine here, this is our test system. This is the heart and soul of the machine. Soil, as you can see here, is piled up in the containment area. You have an excavator that puts the soil into the top of the machine here, where we have a screen. So any large objects, boulders, things like that, that's all removed out of the soil, because obviously we don't want to damage the equipment. And then it goes into a crusher here in the bottom. So what the purpose of the crusher is, we need to get this soil into very, very small particles. That increases the available surface area that we can treat. So your oxidation efficiency when you're treating those soils goes up when you have your surface area increased, okay? Once it's crushed, it then moves into our reaction chamber here. So this is a rotating chamber which has pretty much the heart of our proprietary technology, where we inject a chemical reagent. The chemistries depend on the contaminants that we're treating for the soils, but in this case, primarily H2O2. And then once we have it in the reactor here, to obviously complete our Fenton process, we have to add an iron-based catalyst. So that's how we create the hydroxyl radicals that we use to oxidize the contaminants in the soil. That, as a consequence, creates an exothermic reaction. For any light hydrocarbons up to C20, we're basically Fentoning to water and CO2. And then for the higher hydrocarbon chains, that's when we had to do a little bit more specific R&D in this particular project. So for the secondary phase, what we found actually when we were on site doing this project is the exothermic reaction that we were generating during the treatment process in the reactor. We were actually able to successfully melt and change the specific gravity of the heavier hydrocarbons chains in the soil. So as a result of that, we had a period of around about 15 minutes where we had the ability to remove those from the soil. So essentially what you don't see on the other side of the picture here, we custom designed over the period of 4 to 5 months a soil washing process where we're using an industrial soap to remove and backwash out of the soils. And at the bottom of each of these systems here, there's a collection sump. So in that sump, because we still have a change in the specific gravity, we do have natural separation of the heavier hydrocarbon chains in that water. So we basically used a weiring system to be able to recover those out. And then the water is pumped back around a water treatment facility that's just off the picture here on the other side, where we actually clean that water and then we reuse it back into the process. So during that whole time, that treatment process itself takes approximately around about 20 minutes, give or take, going through the soils. And we had some very successful results. To date, we're the only contractor that's been able to achieve the results required for the project in Kuwait. And if I go next slide here, it just gives you another picture. This is an inside shot of the reaction chamber that you can see there that rotates round. That's where the oxidation process happens. And this is just another picture showing the recovered hydrocarbons, heavy hydrocarbons off of our separation process in our secondary treatment system. So to talk a little bit about the results of the actual project itself, this picture here that you're looking at is obviously the soils before. So you can see in this particular example, this is TPH contamination up to and including 8%, up to C95 with asphaltene and paraffins. And you see a lot of these solid tar balls in here as well, right? So that's what we're dealing with. This is the clean soil through our oxidation process after 20 minutes post-drying. And the third-party analysis, so this is quite a very well-regulated program with the government, so they have a lot of third-party environmental consultants, laboratories that are all involved in this process. So based on their results of this particular sample that we're looking at here, it recorded a 0.3% TPH. So that's obviously a very good result for us because the requirement is 1%. In addition to this, one of the other major blocking parameters for other companies that were working in the country who are primarily doing soil washing with large soil washing facilities is that they were, there's a requirement of 80% mass balance. So 80% of the soils that were getting put into the system, the requirement for the contract was to make sure that you could exceed that level. So in our test here, we achieved 92%. We argued it was a little bit higher than that because this is a closed system. Basically, any of the soil treatment that we're doing as part of this process doesn't leave. We don't reject anything other than the heavy hydrocarbon recovery that you saw in the previous picture. But 92% again is the highest that anybody's been able to achieve in that particular effort. Also the nutritional properties of the soils. So as I was mentioning earlier, the whole purpose of this project is to get soils so that they can reuse in the country for agricultural purposes. That's the next phase of the program. So there is quite a strict requirement on maintaining the nutritional properties and parameters of the soils which are being treated. Ironically, I say ironically because it wasn't by design, that the iron-based catalyst that we used as part of the program for this particular example is an iron-based fertilizer. So what we found is that we either maintained or enhanced certain properties of the soil after it went through the treatment process. So again, this was a third-party laboratory that did that analysis, and we've been able to achieve that parameter now as well. And again, one more thing in terms of the treatment rate. Now, normally our test units here domestically in the US, if we're dealing with WTI, petroleum products, diesel, these are very easy contaminants for us to oxidize through this system. Typically, we can get treatment rates of anything for our smaller system up to about 1,000 to 3,000 tons a day. But obviously for the larger system, the Bumblebee is what we call it, the big yellow machine, we typically get up to around about 10,000 tons a day. But because we're dealing with a heavy hydrocarbon here for our separation, the secondary phase of the treatment system, we had to slow down that treatment rate because the variation in the soils that were sent to us was pretty significant because they come from different parts of the country. So we had to really dial that back in and make sure that we monitored the treatment efficiency from the oxidation process. And we were averaging anywhere around about 100 to 120 tons an hour, which is still pretty significant compared to the alternatives that they were having to consider in the country. And again, I'm not going to go through all this because this is obviously just a little bit more information on the advantages of the system. As I mentioned before, it's an ex situ system, so we're eliminating the requirement to transportation, dig and haul, removal off-site, etc. But kind of just next steps on where this project is now. So we are now rolling out into full production for this system in multiple different sectors around the country. As I said before, this is quite a difficult area to operate in. Some modifications are being made to the system to improve our waste management and our water treatment handling systems, because we have to make sure that when we recover the waste from the treatment process that we can contain that properly. It's a limiting factor. But one of the other main points that we wanted to kind of put across is just the improvements of this system. There's a bit of on-the-go R&D for the last 6 months. The company put millions of dollars into developing this process for the secondary treatment system. And the conditions out there are extremely unforgiving. I don't know if anybody has worked in that region before, but in the summer months, you're getting up to about 55 degrees Celsius in the middle of the day. So not only are you talking about human factors here for people that are obviously operating the system and your storage of your chemicals, but in addition to that, you're talking about the strain and the pressure and the stress that you're putting onto the equipment itself. We had several machinery breakdowns, several engines went out, motors went out. So it's in the middle of the desert as well, so obviously sand gets everywhere. But when you're dealing with rotating equipment, sand is not your friend. So there's a lot of improvements to the design which we're making right now, and then the next phase is obviously to start rolling out full treatment Q1, Q2 of next year of a fully production system here. But Again, domestically here in the United States, the test system on its own is primarily what we run. We have machines that do this kind of work all the time. But I know this has been a little bit different for the Florida Remediation Conference, but we just wanted to share some of the advancements that we've been doing with advanced oxidation for treatment of hydrocarbons in soils. And this is just some of our locations here. Obviously, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm a little bit ahead of time, so I think I recovered back 5 minutes from earlier, so we're good. But yes, thank you very much for listening, and look forward to talking to you all.
I don't know about you, but I heard some desperation in Jamie's voice for some domestic projects here to get out of the desert, so try to get them home over here. But we do have plenty of time for questions, guys, so see one in the back there. And you guys have mics.
Hi, thank you. Great presentation. I was curious. I did some work in Saudi Arabia for a couple of years, and I can certainly appreciate the temperature being 50 degrees Celsius, which, by the way, is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So it does get hot over there. One of the things that Saudi Aramco was concerned about was converting, at that time I had a pump and treat system, and so they were concerned about me converting the water into air contamination. Did you have some type of scrubber system for the soil contamination? Because obviously that was, converting into to deal with air contamination. That's all.
So
thank you.
Is this on? Is this on? Yep. So thank you for translating into Fahrenheit. I forget that America is the only country in the world that works in Fahrenheit, so my apologies. So it's a great question. Actually, we had a meeting this morning with the client over there, and one of the main things that their feedback was during our trial, because that's one thing I forgot to mention, is you have to pass a trial to be able to be an approved contractor to work in the compound area that they have. Quite a lot of security and everything else that go into there. And one of their main bits of feedback on the trial was the waste management and handling system, which is why I mentioned we're spending a significant portion over the next 2 months to really put upgrades into that. So for the trial itself, the system I just showed you right there, it was very basic and very rudimentary. Essentially what we're doing is when we separate that waste, it goes into a frac tank that's stored, and then the water is then put through a baker tank with some series of different weirs to try and get the water down to a reusable level. The full system design, that is what we're going through right now, and we're working with the client to make sure that we comply with whatever requirements they need for handling and management of waste and recycling of water. So I can't tell you exactly a full answer right now, but it's definitely in the focus that we're doing for the next couple of months.
I'd like to ask the volume of soil that you've treated, what the cost is per ton, what the total cost is, and who's funding all this?
Okay, so I'll start with the last one first. So the United Nations, and it's through reparations from the Iraqi government, essentially. In terms of a treatment cost per ton, every soil's different, every level of contamination is different. You won't really truly know until you actually run a system trial on site and you understand the volume of chemicals you require, the concentration, et cetera, But what we find typically on average, because we eliminate a lot of the requirement for transportation, we tend to be about 20 to 30% more optimized compared to that as a method. However, that being said, there are probably more cost-effective options out there for lower levels of contamination, which are obviously still being done in the country. So we're really dealing with the nasty stuff. And one thing I forgot to mention, as kind of like pushing the limits of the envelope of the machine, we actually ran 20% TPH soil through, and we managed to get to a 0.9. So we're really trying to see what other further improvements we can make in the process.
I'm going to do it again, sorry. I actually have questions for the whole panel, so do you want me to start at one end and go across, or?
I think we give everybody else a chance, because I've talked twice.
Okay. Well, I just had a quick question for you, and it I think related to his question. The chemical reaction that's happening in the soil, that is open air, and so is that process creating air quality issues in the immediate area of the treatment?
So somebody else did ask asked me this question this week. So when we're doing Fenton, really what we're generating is CO2. Okay. In terms of issues for air permits, not sure. The Middle East is a little bit of the Wild West, if I'm being quite honest with you. But we do this work all the time here in the US, and we comply with state regulators such as New Mexico, which are very strict, Texas, Oklahoma. So I'm confident, without knowing specifically an answer that's going to satisfy your question fully, but we make sure that we comply, basically.
Okay, thank you. And then moving on to Corey, when you were talking about the fermentation in the tanks being completed by just exposure to the sun, and being in Florida, obviously the temperature changes in the summer versus, say, January. Is there like an ideal temperature that, atmospheric temperature that occurs at? Is it slower at 70 degrees and obviously 105?
Sorry. Yeah, great question. I don't know if I have an exact answer on that, but essentially, if you're going to have bacteria in that tote, like bacteria are everywhere, and if you achieve that optimal temperature, you're going to get active fermentation in your tote. Whereas if you're somewhere in Alaska, to get that fermentation in the tote, it's going to be next to none because the temperature is just so low. Yeah.
Thank you. And then going to Manny, sorry. I actually am working on a similar project here, so I was looking at the similarities between our two projects because mine's in a different part of the state. And so with your gas mitigation system, were there specific vapor barrier type materials you were evaluating for use in that building, or is the soil cap sort of acting as that barrier, or does it incorporate a vapor barrier?
So yeah, just to kind of expand on what I was saying earlier in the presentation, we did have a 60 mil or 40 mil line or whatnot type of thing. The nuance I was trying to explain earlier is, again, it's more cost effective to buy a liner off the shelf and do your design around it, whatnot, and that's one way of doing it. Once you get into proprietary compounds and all that, or like a proprietary type of a barrier, obviously the cost balloon. And when you're looking at like 500,000 square feet warehouses, it just goes through the roof. Just to kind of touch on how these subgrade or barriers are installed or whatnot, you got to be super careful in the sense, because this is the first thing you're doing, right? You're establishing the subgrade and then you're installing the barrier. But then that barrier, probably a foot of fill above it, should be installed by low bearing equipment, which most GCs in town don't do it. So while you're actually opening yourself to a lot of challenges, whatnot type of thing. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. And then just the other question. Part of it you were talking about relocating material,
Yes.
and then because it was a C&D landfill, I'm assuming it wasn't like mixed with impacted soil, so it would have just been like clean C&D, so to speak. But did you run into any like RSM handling issues by moving material around the property?
Yeah, by definition, C&D facilities do generate RSM. But the timeline we were looking at is from 1999 to 2004, so RSM guidance did not come out from FDEP until 2011, right? So the quick answer to your question is, the guy did operate it, the guy did take the big chunks out, whatnot. Whether it was screened down to the 3/4 of an inch, whatnot, that I don't know. But I would say we ran into a 30-40 mix of C&D and 70% soil, maybe like 50-50, whatnot. But the guy did operate a very efficient landfill, in the sense the DDC I was talking about was actually not that super successful, call it. We assumed a certain range, whatnot, or a lot of the geotech did, but we did not get that same level of compression and settlement. So we did start off with a solid subgrade, whatnot type of thing. So that did end up with a lot of costs for like disposal, because we did have to check the box on other sides of the regulation and all that. So we had to do a few of that. So I can go on and on, but I think this is enough.
I have a question for Jamie on the end. Okay, sorry. Your disposal of the, I guess, petroleum that's coming out of the soil, what is the method by which you're disposing of it? Is it just going to be landfilled, reused?
So is this on? Yep. So it's, you're touching on quite an interesting issue. So in the Middle East, in this specific country, the government owns all hydrocarbons. So there is a debate on the waste, on who owns it right now. However, based on the waste that's generated, they take responsibility of it and it disappears somewhere. It's quite the honest answer. However, in a realistic application, it can be resold as off-spec product. It can be disposed of via, I'm sure, landfill or wherever they've got as a designated area to put that kind of hazard waste away somewhere. However, I know their intention is definitely to see what reuse applications they can have for it.
For a follow-up question, has your company assisted them in that, or do you know who they may have, I guess, I don't know, put out for that determined for secondary use or reuse of or reclaim of?
Yeah, so we're talking with them right now, and they want a system that's designed specifically to make it easier for them to recover it. However, we go through a commercial discussion, I suppose, with them with that, but it's quite a hot topic because, as I said, by country law, they own it. So it's been able to give them it back in a fashion which they can store it and transport it to wherever they want it to go. But yes, we are working with them on it. Any regular design that we would do, the reject that we're pulling out of the system, we would design it to go to a storage or temporary storage area where we would then decide if it's going to be disposed of, resold, repurposed, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, we are working with them on it.
I just more of a question, a comment to the presentation about the confidential side. I think we recognize it. I think so. It's more a clarification to my colleagues and regulators and industry and practitioners. Our colleague made this statement about the verification soil sampling. He also made the comment how important was to take pictures and the quality of the field, identifying that it was coming from a quarry. The genesis of our verification sampling requirements is we receive complaints from employees of contractors that, notwithstanding that they were authorized and paid by their clients to bring clean field, a lime rock from a Miami-Dade County quarry, they were bringing impacted contaminated material instead. So the only way to confirm that the field that your client received at the site is to conduct that verification soil sampling. Because unfortunately, we did follow-up inspections to those sites that we received the complaint, and we confirmed that C and D material has been used instead of clean field, and we took soil analytical samples, and we confirmed that contaminated soil has been used instead of clean field. So I just wanted to share that with all of you. That was not mentioned, but that was a huge issue. We did presentation to the industry to make them aware, and I think we all are benefiting to protect the client and to protect the environment. The second issue that was mentioned is the engineer control and the concerns, but also the institutional control that my colleague referred to ensures that 20 years down the line, they're not going to remember the reason for that engineer control plan unless they read in the deed restriction, the covenant, and if they want to move that to a residential project, we will ensure that it's managed properly. So if we don't have those instruments, those institutional instruments, you may have a risk down the line. How many of us have dealt with a project that they closed it 20, 30 years ago, and there's no specific information about it? So thank you for allowing me that clarification.
Thank Thank you, Wilbur.
Dr. Hay, I had one question about the batteries. So for the lithium batteries that they're just storing out in, random areas, is there risk for surface water impacts from them, from rainwater that's affecting them? And you mentioned that there is also PFAS that's kind of bound up in there as well. So is anybody doing any sampling to the soil, to the groundwater kind of around those graveyards to see if there's any PFAS and or lithium impacts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think based on current, research or reporting indicating, as long as the battery not really, breached or, destroyed, the potential release of metals or PFAS are less likely. However, even the battery is dead, for lithium battery, there's still some low energy in it. Like you said, it's the water damage of the battery or elevated temperature bumping during transportation that could cause the fire or explosion. That's per the EPA and the DOT study. Am I answering your question?
Where they have the battery graveyards, I was just wondering if there is any materials coming off the physical batteries that are impacting the soil or the groundwater around it.
You think the battery could impact the nearby soil and the land surface?
I'm asking if that's possible.
Right now, I couldn't answer that. Yeah. I wish, Clean Earth or Clean Harbor or the, waste disposal facility, recycling facility, they are here to help me. Yeah. But we know, the battery, they have very high cobalt, lithium, particularly right now, they said the electrolyte have P4 or PFOS or PFBS, other, surfactant, fluorinated surfactant in the solution.
Any more questions? All right, I'm sure Gene wants to say a few words, so I just thank you all for your participation.
Hang on one
more.
I think we got one more,
right.
And then I will make just a couple of quick comments before we close.
Yeah.
I just have a quick question for Corey about the KB1 Plus. So one example you mentioned about the CDCE accumulation of the pH below 5. So in that case, you will buffer the aquifer. The bacteria will still active after you buffer it, or you have to re-inject the bacteria?
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, that's a great question. We have done extensive treatability studies as well as seen it at other sites. You can generally, the bacteria can substantiate themselves. They're just going to be really slow at that lower pH. So as long as you can bring the pH back up within, I believe it's about 6 months, you don't need to re-bioaugment. You can just stabilize the conditions for the bacteria, and once you bring the pH back up, the degradation will continue.
All right, just a couple of quick comments. First off, all the proceedings, all the presentations will be shot to PDF. I'll have those out to everybody next week along with recordings. If you want continuing education, by the way, I applaud everybody in the room. Look around, there's a lot of people still here on the last day, and it's tough as a presenter sometimes talk to not many people, so I'm encouraged to see so many people still in the room. Certificates of attendance, if you need them, I've already closed down the reg desk, so if you need the form itself, I've got it on the website. You can go in there and download it and then just email it to me. Lastly, I want to give a round of applause, but I'm going to ask for y'all to help me with this because our game show conference next door has been pretty loud, and so I want to do something in return. So if you will, on the count of 3, face that way and give these guys a round of applause. 1, 2, 3. Yay! All right, everybody have a safe trip home. Thank you, everybody. Panelists.